Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Unto Others, Neverland, out September 20th on Century Media Records. The album has 16 tracks, 47 minutes in length, and this is the band's third full-length studio album. They are an American gothic rock metal band. When it comes to the design of this record, at first glance, and perhaps even beyond that, it comes across as a long album. 16 songs, 47 minutes. It feels like it's a very long journey. It's going to be hard to digest and hard to stay connected and engaged with this sort of album when you have these elements in the forefront of what it is, the core of the design and the essence of the record. I think there is some truth to that, but they created an album that individually, as far as the songs are concerned, they have their own little individual journey. They have their own individual path. Having that allows them to have some room to breathe, some room to develop, and that makes the album a little bit easier to process because you're not necessarily always concentrating on where you're going, you're more concentrated on where you are. So that creates a better flow. It makes the album at times feel slightly shorter. Having said all of that, I still feel like when you have an album that has 16 songs, it's going to be hard for the listener to connect with each and every single track, regardless of how much room you have to digest them and how much room they have to breathe. You're always going to pick some, you're always going to find some that are going to jump out of the crowd. You're going to see some trees within this forest line, but you're not going to be able to identify them all. I think if the album was a little bit shorter, then you're in a different position. You're able to see the individuality of each and every single song a lot better because the overall playability of the record would also increase. So you're not only going to give yourself more time with each and every single song, you're going to come back to each and every single song a lot quicker. The distance between listening to one song once and listening to one song twice becomes shorter. And I think that has a more positive impact in the overall experience of the record. Even though this album, the way that it sits, it minimizes that issue of length. As far as the sound is concerned, this is one of those records where the band is not trying to reinvent themselves. They're not trying to create something that they haven't created before. Unto Others sound is alive and well in this record. The main difference for me on this album versus previous records is that it feels like a more polished body of work. It feels like a more mature album where they've learned from everything that they have done. They understood exactly what works and how can we improve on the things that were done well, and how can we remove the things that perhaps weren't done so well. So this album reflects more of the positives and the growth of the band than anything else, and that's where that maturity, that more adult representation of the record, of the sound, comes through. And it comes through with a lot of different elements. If you look, for example, at the lyrical themes, and how those lyrical themes are so well represented by the sound becomes the soundtrack of the lyrics, and then the vocals represent that lyrical content to a T. The connection between all of those three, vocals, lyrics, and sound, almost become inseparable. You cannot take one away from the other. The symbiosis that exists between those three elements blends them together, making the songs have that sense of individuality, that sense of individual journey, while still somehow finding a way of connecting with one another throughout the entire record. This is something that they've done on this album better than on any album before. It's an album that sound-wise still has that gothic rock sound at its base. It has so many hooks. It's a super catchy record. There's a lot of catchy songs throughout this album. There's a lot of catchy melodies, and even lyrically is a very hooky album as well. So it's an album that picks up from that essence of the band of creating a gothic rock sound that you can feel the darkness of the themes, you can feel the darkness of the sound, you can feel the darkness of the atmosphere, but at the same time, you almost want to dance to it. That is something that's always been there with Unto Others, but I feel that on this record, it's turned all the way to 11. The contrast that exists between the darkness, the somberness of the themes, the songs, and the atmosphere, and your ability to still want to vibe to it, comes at an all-time high as far as how this album is presented sonically to the listener. Another element that we can see the growth is on the guitar sound. The guitar sound on this album is phenomenal. Very rich, very layered. It offers a lot of different perspectives. It doesn't have a one-size-fits-all approach. It focuses more on creating melodies, riffs, or even solos that enhance the vibe, that enhance the atmosphere and the mood of the song, versus trying to create something that has a sense of uniqueness to it. It's more about how it makes you feel and not necessarily just how it sounds. And that also shows the growth of the band and also shows a more mature side to the overall composition and to the overall songwriting approach. Outside of these elements, where I think it's where the album really shines, and I think these are the elements that really showcase that growth that I've been talking about, we still have to mention the bass and drums, because this album uses the bass and drums really well in order to catapult some of those impressions that the songs have, those emotions, those vibes that the songs carry. For example, the bass. The undertones of the bass throughout the entire record really help define not just the darkness of the album, but a little bit of how that darkness is perceived. Is it somber? Is it intriguing? Is it evil? All of these things are represented, and a lot of times represented really well by how the bass impacts the sonic experience of the songs. The drums are not overpowering. This is not a band that really overpowers the listener with the drums, but the impact that they have really allows the sound to feel more contained, with some splashes on the outside, which allows the drums at times to break away from that sort of cohesive nature that they have and still find a way of bungee cording them back into that same original spot. So I really enjoyed the drum sound because it offered a lot to the overall experience. It offered a base, a foundation for the overall warmth of the sound, considering how cold and dark some of these songs really are. And then you have the consistent vocal approach. That traditional vocal approach from Unto Others. This record does not change anything, doesn't change one iota. It stays very consistent from start to finish. I think that perhaps the only change that you could say that exists within this record is that while the vocals are very consistent in their delivery, the emotion in which they transport the lyrical content to the listener changes ever so slightly depending on that same lyrical content on a song-by-song basis. So it's a very subtle change, one that is not necessarily noticeable or in the face of the listener, because it's more about how it makes you feel, not necessarily in terms of how it's coming across to you. When you put all of these elements together, you have to look at this album as the band's best record to date. It just shows maturity, it shows growth, it shows development, and at the same time, it shows that they can do all of those things without having to reinvent themselves and staying on path with what they've done in the past. So it's a very important album from that perspective. It shows that they can stay connected with the roots of their sound, the roots of who they are, but still develop an album that has a lot newer elements for the listeners to digest. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Suicide today. For a song that has a little bit of a dark backdrop from a lyrical standpoint, and even from a sound standpoint, it's a very bright track at times. It feels very open. The guitars help give some brightness to this song, almost like saying that it doesn't matter if you are in a dark spot, it doesn't matter if you're going through a dark moment, there's always some light at the end of the tunnel, and that tunnel is just around the corner. Maybe not today, but maybe tomorrow things will get better. Things always have a way of getting better, just if you work towards them and if you find reliance in those around you. This track kind of has that vibe, and that's why it's really interesting, because it merges the overall dark theme that exists within the song, the sense of despair, the sense of suicide, the sense of finality, with that sense of perhaps there is something else out there, perhaps there is some brightness out there, even though sometimes you're not able to see it. The way they were able to create that, not just in the lyrics, but to create that in the vocal approach, but also in the sound that the song has, to me is what sells this song. It's a really interesting track from that standpoint. I love the main melody of the track. The main riff of this song is really memorable, and it helps cut through some of the thicker sound that the track has, but also some of the heavier moments of the track, and also some of that more dark atmosphere that the track carries. Next we have Fame. This is by far my favorite song on the album. I love the bass sound on this track. I love the guitars. The guitars sound phenomenal on this track, and then the drums help keep everything together. It's a melodic, methodic track that almost has a little bit of an 80s vibe to it. It feels like it has a little bit of an essence, a throwback essence to the 80s. And then you have these heavier portions that come in that jolt the track, that give you a little bit of a push, that almost wake you up. And that is an interesting element because it breaks away from that more methodic, melodic routine that the song has. It has a really good solo. It has such a vibe. It's a song that has a vibe, and I just love that more 80s vibe. I love that more methodic approach, that more melodic approach, almost melancholic to a certain degree, and then those jolts of heaviness really help the track flourish. Great vocal performance all around, great guitar sound all around, and therefore this is my favorite track on the album. Now, last but definitely not least, When the Kids Get Caught. I love this song for two main reasons. One, the vocal performance on this track is haunting, for lack of a better word. It hits home. The lyrical content and the way the vocals represent that lyrical content is what had me hooked to this song. I was hooked to the lyrics, and I was hooked to the vocal performance that emphasizes every single moment of those lyrics, that brings the lyrics almost to life in front of you. So that was the first aspect. The second aspect still has to do with the vocals, because the way the vocals are coming in the mix, there's almost a sense of separation. There's almost this sense of being desensitized, where what you're saying and what you're feeling are two different things. You almost have a lack of feelings in terms of how you're presenting the lyrics, in terms of how the vocals are coming across. There's a distance between what you say and the lack of emotions that what you're saying is carrying. This dynamic that the track has on a vocal and lyrical sense is obviously emphasized by the soundtrack, by the overall sound that the song puts forward. A song that has dark, evil, almost somber, evil moments sonically that emphasize those great moments vocally and lyrically, that makes this track jump out. And it feels like such a subdued track, because the way it's presented in that more melodic, methodic approach almost hides a little bit of the lack of personality, the lack of sensitivity that this song puts forward. And that lack of sensitivity is what makes this song feel so dark and so somber, so evil at times. But I love that dynamic. It's a really interesting song, and I think from that approach and from that vocal approach, it's very unique. Even though the vocals don't sound that different from other songs, and even though the sound in the song is not that different from other tracks, the ability to have that sense of separation, to have the vocals in the mix come feeling like there is a sense of separation from how you feel and what you're saying, or lack of feelings in what you're saying, that is what separates this track from everything else. That's what gives this song its own unique fingerprint, and I love this track because of it. This is it, Unto Others, Neverland, out September 20th on Century Media Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Hit me up in the comment section. I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, guys.